So good evening. We are back to the study of the Spirit's book. We are studying the law of progress, and we started this item that is called the March of Progress. We read the first two questions. We are on 781. Just a reminder, when we talk about progress, we have two wings of evolution. We have our spiritual, our intellectual side, and we have our moral side. We have to evolve on both sides, but the evolution is different on one side and on another. The intellectual side is the easiest one because it's just accumulating knowledge. The moral side is the difficult one because we have to eliminate imperfections. So, but the law is of progress, is a natural law, and we are always progressing. There is no regress. Different from Eastern religions that believe that we can reincarnate as an animal. In Spiritism, we learn that once you become an individual spirit and incarnate as a human being, you will always incarnate as a human being, and we will always progress, even when it looks like we are not. Okay, so we are on question 781, Philip.
Do human beings have the power to halt progress? No, but they can hamper it sometimes. What should we think of those who attempt to halt progress and make the human race regress? God will punish them. They will be overthrown by the flow they want to stop. Progress is a condition of human nature, and no one can prevent it. It is a living force that bad laws may hamper, but not smother. When these laws become incompatible, progress breaks them down and continues to do so until the laws of humankind match divine justice, which wills the best for everyone, and until all laws made by the strong to the detriment of the weak are eradicated.
Okay, the law is of progress, right?
Return, but if you hope to...
And we will always be progressing. This question, when I come to this question, I like to talk about slavery, right? Because it was something that existed at the time of that Kardec published this book here in America and in other parts of the world. And there was a group of individuals here in this country that were trying to prevent the abolition of slavery. Progress comes, and it will happen sooner or later through different struggles, but it will happen. When they say here, God will punish them, we know that is the natural law. They will have consequence. So for those that abuse their fellow human beings, directly or indirectly, will have to face the consequences. And those that, even if they don't have slaves, they didn't have slaves, but they were preventing the abolition of slavery, they are creating consequences for the abuse of their fellow human beings. Human laws, as we study also, they change and they adapt. As we evolve, human laws evolve also and get closer to the divine law, which is perfect. But then we are, of course, far from that. But the law is of progress. Those that attempt to halt progress, and that's very important because there is a lot of discussions nowadays. We're not going to get into politics here, of course, but there is a lot of individuals that are trying to prevent some progress in different areas. And we're not going to go into the areas. Progress will happen independently of, it can be delayed. The human laws or the act of individuals can delay our progress, but it will happen. You know, when I was talking with Elmo about something like this some months ago, and Elmo said, we all are going to go back to the spiritual world one day, right? So these people that oppose progress, they'll go back to the spiritual world, and they'll have to face the consequence, and they'll have to come to a new society when they come to the next reincarnation, where something they were trying to oppose is no longer opposable, because it became accustomed of the new humankind. So as we understand the logic of progress, and we understand that it is inevitable, it helps us not to get accommodate, because it's our obligation to help humanity evolve and to fight for laws that will help humanity evolve. But we cannot get angry or resort to extreme measures against those that are trying to prevent progress of happening. Okay?
No, I'm just thinking of here of those who may seek to halt the progress, but really believing sincerely that they are doing the best for humanity.
That's the next question.
Oh,
Exactly the next question. So we'll come back to what you were going to say.
no, I was putting up the question, but you
Yeah.
can certainly answer.
Yeah.
I recognize things I like.
João, let me go back to the word punishment. Let me ask you about the word punishment, which you translate nicely to consequences, right?
Yeah.
Which I think aligns more to our days, or at least our studies.
The modern thought of
thoughts,
spiritism.
the way we see. I also want to bring it was in the past used to be punishment from God.
Yeah. Right?
And here we're talking about consequences based on the natural laws. How do we translate these consequences? Well, what can they be? Because they will vary according to each individual's conscience.
Yes.
Not necessarily how they are judged.
No.
How they judge themselves.
Yes. And again, according to your knowledge and evolvement, right? You cannot be responsible for making a mistake on something you didn't know better, right? So let's go back to slavery. Those that opposed slavery, even if they were sincere, there is already a knowledge that slavery is not, you cannot treat your fellow beings as slaves. That's a concept that already existed at that time. When the caveman enslaved the other caveman, or forced the other caveman to do forced service, the consequences are pretty much non-existent, because they don't know better. There is no social laws, there's no understanding of the moral consequences. So in that sense, there is a difference, right? And those that today practice slavery illegally, because there's still slavery in the world, they are much more responsible than those that opposed the abolition of slavery when slavery was legal, because it was something that was still accepted by a part of society. So even if they were going against the moral laws and the understanding, there was something that was still part of our evolutionary path. So they are responsible, but less responsible than those that enslave people today. Because the more you know, the more responsible you are. And the responsibility, it doesn't come immediately when you go back to the spiritual world. You may have to go through difficult experiences, either in the spiritual world or in a new incarnation, for this to come to your reflection and understanding of your abuses, right? So it may take a while for this to come, but it it doesn't go unpunished in a way in the spirit world, because someone like this, when they go to the spirit world, they are going to be enslaved by spirits that are the leaders of the lower zones. So they will find firsthand how it works, right? So there are several ways of going. But again, the poor cavemen that had no responsibility, they go back to the spiritual world. There is no spirits there to enslave them, because the vibrations are not the same. They don't go to those places. They stay very close to where they lived and come back to a new reincarnation very close, very quickly. So there is no real karma in the sense that we understand karma. There is little karma, but not the serious karma.
But even karma is a difficult word to
It's not a
associate.
spiritist word, yeah.
Yeah, it's still very difficult to compare to the consequences, because I don't really understand much, but I imagine it is associated to some judgment that comes from outside or from God or for someone, I don't know.
No. The concept of karma is that there is a consequence for actions that you do here, bad consequences.
And you impose that consequence. Or it comes
There is
from-
no definition for that. It's not a divine punishment or a personal punishment. It's just a I wouldn't say natural law, because it's not.
It's almost an automatic.
It's an automatic thing. You have the karma and you have the dharma, right? Which is the positive consequence.
Or event way, there is a karma Z period.
Mhm.
If you committed A, expect Z to follow. Period.
Yeah,
Where does it come from?
I don't think they go into this subject. Yeah.
But I think we should think consequence and more as an opportunity to learn, to understand why that line of thought is not a good one. An opportunity for you to learn to make the corrections in yourself. That's how I understand the consequence. And I'm sure the divine laws have like 1,000 ways of measuring everything to provide the best opportunity to make those corrections. But then I understand that main two things to be what Jean said, knowledge and true intention. Those two things are the most important. That's why I asked over here. So what about if people really believe that this action is the best thing for humanity? The intention is real. Definitely the knowledge is not there. So how do you balance that?
And that's the next question. Philip.
782.
Yeah.
Are there individuals who honestly obstruct progress while believing that they are helping it move forward, because they often regard something as progress that is not such? Yes, they are like small pebbles under the great wheel that cannot keep it from moving.
Yeah, so that was Elmo's question, right? Because of course, you cannot say that all those that oppose progress, they have second, what's the word? They have ill intention. Some of them honestly believe that you should follow the laws, and that you can find that. Let's talk about the religious people, right? People that follow religions have a series of rules, right, that condemn a lot of things, prohibit a lot of things. There are religious people that follow those rules because they really believe that that's God's will, right, or God's desire, right? So those that for instance, the Catholic Church that does not allow a person to get separated and to get married again, right? Because it's a sin. They oppose the change. We in Spiritism has taught us from 200 years ago that, it's not a God's law. It's a human law, the wedding, the marriage, right? So the progress of humanity will be, in the sense, and other religions already accept that, right? That, separation is part of the possibilities that happen when a couple no longer can live together for different reasons, right? So people that honestly try to prevent this from happening and condemn and even persecute those people, because we know that from nowadays less and less, but until you see movies from the 50s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, that children from separated couples were discriminated in school, right? Like children from same-sex couples are discriminated today. And those discriminating, they will face the consequence, but they're honest. They really believe, right? So there are small pebbles here. The law is of progress. They will have to learn and adapt. Maybe not in this incarnation, maybe going back to the spiritual world, but they will not prevent progress. The progress will happen regardless, right? Did you have something else that you're thinking on that?
This was a real question that didn't have an answer. But since from the answer over here, the Spirits tell us they are of little importance. They're just small pebbles, they are of little importance.
Yeah.
So those who have the wrong idea, but with good intention, very small, or small significance or small consequences. Seems to me that it will be redirected easier because the intention is good.
Yeah.
Although the knowledge is not there.
Yeah, it is. It's still, if you go back in history, right, and analyze the opposition to all changes, right, when the priests, the religious people burn individuals in the fire because they believed that they were heretics or they were again, it's a much more serious. But can you say that they were all burning because they didn't believe? They really believed that that was the solution for the lack of faith of these individuals, right? To say that they just wanted to kill those people. There were some that really wanted just to kill those people. But when they condemned Galileo to die, to be burned, because he tried to say that it was not the sun that went around Earth, was Earth around sun. Those that opposed him, some of them really believed that, right? Again, the punishment creates a serious consequence. They are not small pebbles, the ones that condemn Galileo. But to say that they didn't believe in what they were doing, I believe that most of them did believe, right?
It's extremely individual. It's really your conscience, it's your negative of God being the God inside of your conscience that you cannot like to, and all the consequences derive from that.
Yeah.
I keep thinking here of let's say in women's rights, places like Iran, like Afghanistan, that moved forward and now really took quite a few steps backward. The leaders, those responsible for that, they would have to face some great consequences.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then even if they don't have the knowledge, if we understand consequences as an opportunity to learn, they're still going to have that opportunity to learn, which the consequence has the negative connotation of a punishment or a judgment. But if we see it from the angle of opportunity to learn, regardless of how ignorant you were about what you were doing, you're still going to suffer the consequences or be offered the opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And that might be suffering. It
Yes.
might not be.
Yes. No, and talking about those that persecute women, for instance, right? They already know better. We live in a world. We live in a world that they know better. They are doing it out of a blind faith or fanaticism, and there are serious consequences for that. You cannot claim ignorance, right? You can claim ignorance in a tribe in the middle of Africa that has no internet or no access to the outside world. But in these countries that have access to internet, they're not small pebbles. They are going to face more serious consequences. Okay, questions? Okay.
783. Does the improvement of humanity always follow a progressive and slow march? There is a regular slow progress that inevitably results from circumstances, but when a population does not advance quickly enough, God creates a physical or moral shock that hastens its transformation. Human beings cannot remain unaware forever because they must reach the goal God set for them. Circumstance enlightens them gradually. Moral revolutions, like social revolutions, are introduced into the minds of a nation slowly. They continue to evolve for centuries and suddenly sprout, toppling the crumbling structure of the past that is no longer in harmony with the goals and objectives of a new day. Human beings often perceive only the fleeting chaos and confusion that affect them in their material interests, but those who raise their thoughts above themselves admire the divine planning that brings good out of evil. Such commotions are like a storm that purifies the atmosphere after disturbing it.
Yeah. So the law is of progress. Progress happens whether we like it or not. But sometimes we as a society try to delay progress, right? And when it becomes something of an impediment for humanity to progress, then there is a collective consequence that may be, as they say here, a physical or moral. What is the physical? For instance, the bubonic plague in Europe in the Middle Ages, right? The society in Europe became so engessada, paralyzed in their own ways in the feudal system, that something needed to change. And then the bubonic plague caused the end of the feudalism and the beginning of Renaissance. So it became a big change for society. The moral shock, as Kardec explains here, moral revolutions are introduced in the minds of a nation slowly. So the anti-slavery movement, the pro-women movement, they start slowly, and then they start to grow, and then they reach a point, and if it doesn't happen naturally, it happens through the Civil War or through some other movements, right? The women's freedom movement that happened, what's happening in Iran these days, right? It can be the beginning of something. So some fire is like lit, right? And something eventually will happen from this. This is what Kardec is telling us here, that progress will happens, right? So even if what's happening in Iran today doesn't succeed immediately, you will eventually do, right? 10 years, 20 years, we'll come back. If it doesn't succeed now, we will come back later, because it's a progress. It has to progress, right? What you see in China today also, right? The little manifestations anti-COVID and things like that is the beginning of something that will, because the freedom of society is a consequence of the law of progress, and we'll get there eventually, right? At the time of Kardec, how much of the world was really free? Individuals were free? Very little, right? Nowadays, I don't know, you work on the United Nations, how much of the humanity, probably 1/3 or half of humanity, are living in a relatively free environment, right? Of course, you have some restrictions, yes, but you know, for each North Korea or Cuba or Venezuela, there is a large number of countries where you have, you know, even if there are problems here and there, you have freedom, right? So freedom is something that eventually will happen everywhere, right? And I'm saving Sweden here for later for another question here, but we'll talk about Sweden, which I think is a great example of how society, humanity changes fast, right? Okay. Questions?
784. The perversity of humankind is immense. It seems that human beings are regressing rather than advancing, at least in terms of morality. You are wrong. Look at the human race as a whole, and you will see that it is advancing. It has arrived at a clearer perception of what is evil and witnessed the reform of some kind of abuse every day. An excess of wickedness is required to show the need for good and the need for reforms.
Yes. So what Kardec says here is that when you look around, the perversity of humankind is immense. And then we today, 150 years later, we still think the same, right? We just have to look outside and then see what's happening outside around us in the world and think about that. But if we have a bird's eye view of the progress of humanity, it's difficult not to see progress, right? At the time of Kardec, you know, how many things that at that time were still legal, right? We just talked about slavery and women that had no right. And nowadays, you know, the fact that it's against the law to discriminate against others is a huge progress. Of course, doesn't mean that we don't. There are still people that discriminate against women, against races, against sexual preferences, but it's not legal. It's punishable in this country, right? So this is progress. The law, human law, has to come first to impose this. In 50, 100, 200 years from now, there will no longer be this type of discrimination because it becomes something part of our progress, right? As we evolve morally and intellectual, and customs evolve also, these sort of things tend to diminish until they disappear, right? I think that the progress of I was reading today a statistic. We know that African Americans are discriminated. That's a fact, right? But I read today that the difference in income from white people and African American, white families and African American families has diminished by 32% in the last 20 years. So it is progress. You know, it's less than we wish. we would like that not to even have to discuss this, not to even have to have this conversation, because there was no discrimination, but we know there is. But there is progress, right? So when I read that today, I thought about it. I said, I'm studying the law of progress, and then I come across this news out of nowhere. I thought it was interesting, right?
And I think even when it clearly looks like it's a step back, like Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What's happening with women and girls in Afghanistan looks like it is a step back in one way. But there was progress in the hands of the girls that lived a period of going to school. There was progress in the mothers and the women that had lived that period when they were able to have access to education. So now they can't at all, but that learning is still with them, that eagerness, that there's still progress that stayed.
And we'll come back.
It will.
Yeah.
So I still think it looks like it's, we went backwards. And yes, we did, but other things progressed.
Yeah.
And they'll continue.
And my point to that is, yes, I agree, it's regress now, but we are looking at it at a very small period of time, so the time that it will become known in comparison to the long run.
Yeah, when you look at the history of Afghanistan 200 years from now, this is going to be a blip, right? But of course, like I always say, you cannot tell someone that lost all family to the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages that this is progress. You cannot see the progress, right? You have to be able to look from a distance, like we just are in the end of towards the end of a pandemic, right? The lessons we are going to learn from this pandemic can only be seen 50 years from now. We will have to look back 50 years from now and see why it was necessary and what we have learned, how much we progress. But we cannot do it in the middle of it. It's not fair to ourselves. It's not fair to those losing loved ones through it, right? So it's not something that it should be even discussed, right? In what we say here is it happened for a reason. Humanity need to go through that, but why and what's the consequence? We will know eventually, not today and not in 2-3 years and not soon, right?
Yes, when you had the Arab Spring, I said, now that's going to move up, they move up again. Then it's like,
yeah,
so hopeful, but then you have to rethink. Now it has to be slowly. It's never too fast.
Yeah, no, but the taste of liberty stays, and so the seed is planted, right? And the seed, you can see with these things that we are discussing in terms of progress of discrimination in same-sex marriage, difference of other things here that is being discussed. The youth, our kids, they have much less issues with that or any issue at all. The majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them, right? And they will become, so in 30 years, when we are all gone back to the spiritual world and they are still here, right? Or 40 or 50 years, there will be a new society, right? That's progress. Okay.
785. What is the greatest obstacle to progress? Pride and selfishness. This is in terms of moral progress, as intellectual progress is constant, and at first glance, it seems to magnify those vices by developing ambition and the love of possessions and wealth. These feelings drive human beings to carry out the research that enlightens their minds, and this is how all things are linked together in the moral and physical worlds, and how good is eventually created out of inequity. This condition is only temporary and will change as human beings become aware that there is an infinitely greater and everlasting happiness beyond the realm of earthly pleasures. Two types of progress mutually support one another, but do not necessarily occur at the same rate: intellectual progress and moral progress. In civilized nations, the former is currently receiving a great deal of encouragement, and it has reached a degree of advancement that is incomparable to past ages. The second is very far from reaching the same point, although if we compare the social values across centuries, we are forced to admit that progress has also been made in this direction. Why has progress stalled in morality more than in intelligence? Why should there be less of a difference between the morality of the 19th and 24th centuries than between the 14th and the 19th? Not questioning the consistency of moral progress would be to assume either that the human race has reached the peak of perfection, which would be ridiculous, or that it is not morally perfectible, which experience contradicts.
Okay. Where's Paco to say in English, please? So that's very important. The first two words from the spirits. What is the greatest obstacle to progress? Pride and selfishness. This is over and over. We'll find in Spiritism references to the greatest obstacle to progress, which is pride and selfishness. And again, pride here in the sense of feeling superior to everyone else, not pride in the sense, there is a positive sense of pride when you do a good work, when you are able to help someone, when you help others, you produce a good work and you feel happy and proud of yourself for having achieved something without feeling superior to anyone else. That's what we can call a healthy pride, right? Here, they are talking about pride in the sense of feeling superior to others, being a proud individual, proud race, proud gender, that the rest is inferior. That's the type of pride they are talking about. Selfishness is selfishness, right? Thinking about ourselves first, above all. So the Spirit say here that intellectual progress is constant. It's something that we always say, right? It's just accumulating. It's putting on top of things that you already know, learning more, accumulating knowledge. So it's always constant. And the more we evolve, the more we are able to leave this intellectual progress to those that come after us, that will build on that already. So that's how society progresses constantly, right? And the Spirit tells us here that this develops new ambition and the love of possessions and wealth. So we could say, so this harms the moral evolution. Well, those two evolutions go together. Intellectual evolution go unto a certain point, and it reaches a point that the moral evolution has to catch up. So it will reach a point that's on an individual basis. You reach a point that you can no longer evolve intellectually if you don't bring the moral side a little bit up. Because if you involve too much intellectually and your moral side is not evolved, you are going to use this intellectual evolvement to do evil, right? Because you have the knowledge and the power to do that. and you don't have the moral qualities. So you are going to do evil. And by doing evil, you are going to limit your ability to continue evolving intellectually. You have to bring the moral side to it. That's how they balance, right? Of course, there are few that evolve more morally than intellectually. Very few of us. But also, you can only evolve morally to a certain point, and then you have to bring the intellectual. Because it reaches a point where you are, without the intellectual knowledge, you cannot add to your moral qualities. It's hard for us to grasp this concept, but it exists. And it's hard even to explain. But you cannot become a perfect spirit morally without the intellectual going also to become perfect spirit. Again, because we are used to the other side, it's easier for us to understand the intellectual involvement, the necessity to bring the moral. But exists the other side also. Let's say, you know, and I'm not saying that she wasn't intellectually evolved, because I believe she was, but let's talk about Mother Teresa, right? Her work was all moral, right? We can see that the result of her work, you could see the moral involvement. But we don't know much about the intellectual involvement of Mother Teresa. We don't know. We know a little bit about her letters, the reflections that she made. So again, this is my opinion. I think she's intellectually evolved enough. But let's say that she was not. She would probably come to a new incarnation focused in a scientific aspect, you know, studying, but always with the moral aspect already there. She's going to be studying science with the view of helping humanity, because it's part of who she is. But she will focus there, because that's where she would need to bring up the intellectual abilities a little bit.
And maybe she was focused on the intellectual abilities in the previous life, and in this life she focused on the moral.
Possibly.
Like most of us, perhaps.
Yeah, most of us still focus on intellectual development.
Yeah, but I mean, there may be get to a point where we may understand enough to do that balance or that switch.
Yeah, when you need to evolve morally, you are going to come with limited abilities to evolve intellectually. And again, limited doesn't mean challenged, mentally challenged. No, limited means, you know, you are going to be a good professional on whatever you choose, but you are not going to be, you are going to need to develop empathy, patience, things like that, that you know, you are not going to excel on the intellectual side, because if you excel on the intellectual side, it's very easy not to focus on the moral evolution. You need to not excel on the intellectual side to be in contact with your need to evolve morally, right? So you probably come as a humble person, right? Living in a humble region, things like that. Again, it's just ideas.
My hypothesis for those individuals with this high moral standard compared to most of us, way above us, is when they come to those missions, it is because their intellectual ability is at least matched to the present, and I believe even above to the present. But for that mission, they're not going to use it. They don't need it. Okay, they're completely free of the material needs that we have. They are in a state of moral progress that they can do without most of the things that we seek intellectually speaking. They already have it. So you think with Socrates, you think of Chico Xavier. I mean, it's nobody gonna tell the Chico Xavier it was an extremely intellectual spirit to be able to publish what he published. There's no way that Emmanuel could dictate those books to him if he didn't have the intellectual ability to put those things in a paper. Those high eloquent concepts of brain anatomy, brain physiology, he has to have that. It would be impossible. So they already have the intellectual there, but in that mission, they're going to work on the moral sides of it because they don't need it, like the suck and swap, right? I mean, I just come over here to look all the things that I don't need to be happy.
Yeah. And they asked Chico in that Pingafogo, right? They asked about the two books in Evolution in Two Worlds and Mechanisms of Mediumship. How could
he might steal it? He has an spirit.
Yeah, and he said he gave, of course, a very humble answer, right? Oh yes, those books are very complicated. He didn't say anything about his knowledge or anything like that, but I agree with you. I think that the intellectual abilities are there. It's just that they don't need to use it in this.
Right.
Yeah,
Because most of us use our intellectual ability in exchange for something, right?
yeah,
We go to school because we get a good job, because we think, or the academics go because we're recognition in general, right? They don't need that.
Yeah.
At least in this incarnation, not their mission.
yeah. Okay. Should we move on?
Degenerate peoples. History shows us many peoples that have relapsed into barbarism after being subjected to shocks or blows that have devastated them. Where is progress in these cases? When your house threatens to fall down, you tear it down to build another that is more stable and more practical. However, chaos continues in your home until the latter is built. Here is another example. You are poor and live in a hut, but you become wealthy and leave the hut to live in a palace. A poor person then comes along and moves into the hut you have vacated. This individual is a winner in the move, as he or she was previously homeless. Well then, learn from this that the spirits incarnated in this declining culture are no longer those who have comprised the culture during its time of splendor. The more advanced spirits have moved on to better worlds and have progressed, while the less advanced have taken their vacated places, which they too will in turn vacate.
Yeah, that's when I read this question, my first thought is always Egypt, right? Because Egypt was the most advanced civilization in the world 6,000 years ago, right? At the time of the pharaohs, the time of the pyramids. And we learned from Emmanuel that the spirits from Capella came and incarnated in Egypt, brought the intellectual advancement, brought the moral advancement also, because they came from Capella because they were not morally evolved enough to stay in Capella, but they were more morally evolved than those of us living here, right? And then when you look at Egypt today, which is not a developed country, it's a country with a lot of problems and a lot of difficulties. The spirits that used to live there in the time of the pyramids are all gone. They went back to Capella. Emmanuel was clear on that, right? So other spirits replaced them. And the other spirits are not as advanced. They are in the process of evolution. Of course, we're talking about 8,000 years. It's a long period, right? So, but the example here on the house that vacates, right? You move to a better house, and a poor person that had no house move into your house. It's progress for all of them, right? For the poor person's progress, for us is progress. So everybody's progressing, and it's the same thing. The fact that you look at a specific country and think that they have regressed because of maybe the population there is less evolved compared to the rest of the world. Again, compared to the rest of the world, it may not be the reality, because the spirits that are incarnating there are spirits that are in need of that type of experience in that day, right? So I think that when you look at the example that the spirits gave us here, I think it helps us understand how progress is made. When they talk about the destruction and reconstruction of the house, it's also a very interesting subject, right? Because in the period of transformation, there is chaos, but the chaos happens for a better end game, let's say. In order for you to build a better house, you need to go through the chaos, which is the rebuild of the house, right? I'm a civil engineer by graduation, right? And one thing that I never forgot that we learned is that when you are rebuilding your house, it never finishes. You just get tired at a certain point and stops. So, we all know how to rebuild some place where we live. It's a nightmare, right? And but the end result is better than what you had before. So it's progress. But to go through progress, sometimes we have to go through difficult times, right? Okay. All right. I think we have time for one more.
787. Are there individuals who are intrinsically rebellious towards progress? Yes, but they are progressively becoming extinct physically. What will be the fate of the souls that incarnate in these races? They will reach perfection by experiencing other lives. God does not disinherit anyone. So the most civilized human beings may have been savages and cannibals. You were one once, even more than once, before becoming what you are now.
Yes, direct answer from the spirits, right? So again, what I mentioned before that with my discussion with Elmo, right? Those intrinsically rebellious towards progress, they will go back to the spiritual world, right? They will all die, and progress will happen, and they will come to a better world, and they will reach perfection by experiencing other lives. We are all children of God, and we will reach perfection one day, different paths, different evolutionary speed, but we will all get there, even if we resist. And of course, in our past, in our beginning, when we were primitive people, right? We were all of us cannibals. I don't know. But
Kardec was definitely.
right? We know that in civilization, when we were through the first steps, we were very primitive spirits that committed other barbaric acts, and maybe cannibalism was not the worst thing that we did. That's food for thought. But what doesn't matter, because the law is of progress, and we are now at a different stage, and that's one of the reasons we don't remember our past incarnations, our previous incarnations. I wouldn't like to remember the time that I was eating my fellow beings. I don't think it's a nice recollection that I would like to have, right? Okay.
For the first answer here, sorry, it says yes, but they are progressively becoming, so it's happening, extinct physically. So it gives us idea that some of them are not being allowed to reincarnate here any longer, but they remain backwards somewhere else, but not being allowed to reincarnate any longer.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Wouldn't that still be physically? Could be in another planet, wouldn't that be considered still physically
But I think it's a reference to here,
here.
yeah.
or extinct here?
Us, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think here also the spirits are talking about races. Races become extinct also. More primitive races become extinct also. You know, you have less and less primitive races and more advanced races. I think that what they meant here also. You know, the races we have today are different from the races we had, you know, at the time of.
But the question is individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, the question is individuals. But individuals can be a group of individuals that form a race. Again, we're just speculating here, right? So I think we are going to stop here because we're going to talk about nations next week, and I think my example of Sweden will have to be for next week. If you if you are curious, just study the history of Sweden from the 19th century to today, and you see how a nation can evolve in a relatively small space. More than 1/3 of the population of Sweden immigrated in the 19th century because of lack of ability to survive in the country because of harvests and things like that. And nowadays is a world of regeneration, like I normally say here, together with the country where you live on now. That's a world of regeneration. Yeah. Okay. So couple of things. This Sunday we have our first mediumship forum of New York here at SGNY's building on room 4A from 2 to 4 p.m. is mediumship from the basic concepts on how it works in Spiritism. What is mediumship according to Spiritism? We are going to have a brief explanation of mediumship according to Spiritism, on a mediumship meeting, a testimonial by a medium here of SGNY, and then a Q&A, so you can bring your questions about mediumship, all right? If a question is not related to the mediumship, save it for our Q&A sessions on Sundays. But also on Saturday, on tomorrow, there is a new program that starts from the United States Spiritist Federation, which is a study of the work of Joana de Angelis, Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life. It's a weekly podcast-like series on YouTube, the United States Spiritist Federation YouTube, TV Mansão do Caminho, and sponsored by the Spiritist Medical Association of Brazil and the United States Spiritist Federation and the International Spiritist Council. Every Friday, 6 p.m., a new episode. They are all pre-recorded episodes, so you can watch it when they first come, or you can watch it later. It's a study of the works of Joana de Angelis. Talks are based on the works of Joana de Angelis and will offer us a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, actionable tips, and real-world advice to help you lead a better life. Okay, this starts tomorrow, 6 p.m. Then. Saturday, the lecture Saturday is by Flavio Zanetti, and the title of the letter is, I don't think I have it here. I forgot. We didn't have it in our email because I didn't get it on time. Sunday we'll be studying the book Liberation. It's the last chapter. It's a long chapter. We are going to do the first part of it, and we are going to finish early because of the event here. So we are going to study from 11 to 12, and then we'll come here. The book club next week, chapter 4 of Hail Christ, that they will talk about. And anything else? I think that's it, right? Carol, you do our final prayer?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thank you, Elmo and Philip. Thank you for reading this evening. Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, we are grateful to be together this evening for our study of the Spirit's book, The Law of Progress. The law of progress is God's law, the natural law. Individuals who hamper progress knowingly will face the consequences, perhaps in this life or in future lives. Eventually, human laws will evolve to be much more compatible with divine laws. Knowledge and intention are important factors to do progress in our lives. There can be moral shocks outwardly in the world, which helps to speed up transformation within the individual as well as societies. Pride and selfishness are the greatest obstacles to progress. Moral progress usually lags behind the intellectual progress. However, it has to catch up. Balance is necessary on the path to perfection. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, for guiding and inspiring us. May we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us, and also for our loved ones, friends, and those who are near and dear to us. We pray for inner peace and world peace, and for those who are now suffering in the physical world as well as the spiritual worlds. We pray for our center, SGNY, and all spiritist centers throughout the world, that they may grow, expand, and be totally protected. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to family, friends, loved ones, and coworkers. May we go forth now and remind ourselves to be beacons of light. Go now in love, light, and peace. So be it.